One important aspect which has always baffled, or somewhat at least given rise to thought, among the Pakistani, the Indian, the Bangladeshi, Sri Lankan, and other small countries around, about the strength of union of India and strength of union of Pakistan. Now, this is a interesting topic. Not that people are not aware of the entire history of the Indian subcontinent. Um, Although it is said that the division of India occurred in 1947, and in India they say, well, the British wanted divide and rule, and that's why they divided the subcontinent. But the policy of the Europe and USA after that is that as soon as the remaining India, the current India, took interest in rejoining the Western powers somewhere around late 1950s, they were very eager, and it appears that there was a substantial lobby even in the British, even at the time of the partition of Pakistan and India, which did not want partition of India. They were keeping an eye on the rising power of Russia and also increasingly winning China, and they wanted some type of counterbalance against it. And one of the reasons that Pakistan came close to China was basically the Western support which India received in the 1962 war. Having said that, if we go a little back, Pakistan itself was, for example, under Ranjit Singh, a small Punjab itself was a small country which that at that time included Kashmir and also certain parts on the other side of Sindh and the entire, if not all, the KPK. What was later known as the Northwest Frontier Province of the Pashtuns. And the Sikh regime was basically a Jat-dominated regime. Then, of course, there were Amirs and Mirs of Sindh, who also at one time, the Talpurs and some certain other dynasties which followed the Mughal Empire's decline, they were almost small countries also. And then there were obviously certain states of Kalat and Las Bela and like that. There were also in Pakistan small states like Swat, Dheer, Chatral, and of course the very important state of Bahawalpur. On the Indian side, it was absolutely mayhem. Combined India had got somewhere around 500 or something like that states of princes, and one third of the India was ruled by these princes. And the most famous among people, what people know, is usually the Nizams of Hyderabad and also the Bhopal and many other small states. And that was what India was at the eve of partition. What was India in 1857? That is the War of Independence. At that time, at the time of War of Independence, the Punjab had recently been dominated by the British, and the Sindh was dominated by the British beforehand. Although in Punjab there were many parts, the northernmost parts, where before that, this time, although there was nominal government of many people, but there were many lawless areas throughout. And then there was in India the various small states and so on. And if you go a little back, rather much back in India, before the advent of the Muslims, and even in the presence of the Muslims, India was very, very divided country, and various rajas and various dynasties, and uh, India as a unified state. I don't think that India has seen a more unified government uh, after independence uh, for not less than about 1,000 years or something like that. So India at the moment is probably the most unified state of all regarding its history, except for certain small periods of the late Mughals and some of the earlier Turkish sultans, which also temporarily united large parts of India. But otherwise, I don't think that Indian history is testimony to unity of India as it is now. And also the type of government. The governments of the Mughals, for example, or some of the earlier kings and so on, they were basically um, they were basically confederations. They were not really centralized federations. Uh, they were there were all types of agreements with various provinces in which some were directly controlled, and the governors were appointed by the Mughals and so on. And then there were some which were semi-autonomous, and some just paid some money and so on. And that it was almost like the Ottoman Empire. The centrally controlled area, the core of the empire, was much smaller than the actual what you see on the map. So various alliances were also included in the map, as long as there were some finances coming, and they were prepared to accept themselves as the overall sovereigns of, and but were running, local people were running the things themselves. Now, after this long introduction, what is the state of India now? To the outsider, there will be a lot of talk of Bharat and so on, and unity of Bharat and so on. And even Pakistan's military dominated government do not take much interest in India's internal divisions or diversity. They are more interested in just who is in Delhi or what is happening in Bombay maximum, and maybe the Kashmir especially, and some parts of Punjab, the Sikh parts of Punjab. That is all the focus of the Pakistan's various governments. However, before this, the breakage of Pakistan, when East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, was also part of Pakistan, Pakistan also took interest in what's happening around in, say, in neighboring Assam and neighboring Burma or something, coastal, adjoining areas and so on. With the breakage of that, obviously that interest also waned, and also the necessity also waned. Overall, within India, you can divide the population into north and south. And traditionally, for example, most of the Mughal period and most of the Muslim period was mostly rule of the north. It was not rule of the south, especially deep south, except certain periods during late Aurangzeb's time, or certain periods in which there were states, Muslim states, for example, Masur, or and later on Nizams, and then there were also the states on the border between north and south, the Golconda, the Bijapur, and so on. But overall, Muslim influence in the southernmost tip and southern part of India as rulers has not been very much, and some people claim that the kind of Hindu-Muslim animosity which exists below the surface in the north of India uh, is somewhat less in the south of India, because there was not much in terms of any competition for power or anything over the centuries. Practically, north and south divide of India is not just a divide of geography, it is also a divide of appearances and to some extent the races. The traditional theory which used to be held was that the Aryans, they moved from the north and they moved towards the south, and that is the reason that the people in the north of India and Pakistan are somewhat fair colored, and the ones who are in the south of Pakistan, India, are indigenous, and they are quite dark and thick hairs, and they have certain features which are somewhat different from the north of India. That is a fact. That's for example Tamil Nadu and these areas, Kerala and so on. Obviously, there is people are physically somewhat slightly different. There is less admixture of race, and probably they are the original Indian races. As Muslims conquered India, the Turks basically in the beginning, there was slight conversion to Islam, and it is said by some people that most of the conversion to Islam occurred among the so-called Vaishyas, the third tier of the society of India, and fewer Kashtaris, the second tier, the princely tier, and very occasionally any Brahmin. And it is also said that the Muslim rulers, because they felt that the Kashtaris are their opponents in the sense that they were the princely, the ruling class, so the Muslims deliberately gave more importance to the Brahmin class to counterweight the Kashtari class. And some of the British authors, they are of the view that the rise of Brahman in the society, political part of the society, has something to do with the prolonged Muslim rule. When the British came, they were also interested in conversion, and the conversion which the British somewhat managed was not that of the Vaish class or the Kashtaris or the Brahmins or the Muslims, but they did manage the conversion of Shudra class, the fourth one, and also some conversions around their cantonments and churches which they built in India. And these communities are still around, and they are quite substantial in number, although they seem to have lost some patronage which was present during the time of the British. Another division of India is obviously the Punjabi Sikhs are a separate kind of thing themselves, there is no doubt about that. And then there is obviously the more Chinese looking areas near Nepalese borders and Ladakh and that type of area. And some of the customs and some of the things are obviously different from the mainstream India. And other important division in India is the division of India compared to Bengal. A manifestation was seen recently when the Indian government so-called annexed Kashmir, which was obviously is an impossible situation because it's a United Nations position is already there about a plebiscite and so on, and it's obviously contentious. But when it was done against some of the agreements that India had made with the local politicians long time back and rulers, the one of the protests, they came from the Indian Bengal, because Bengal, the sense of alienation between, for example, between East and West Pakistan, which later on became Bangladesh, that is the Bengali versus the West Pakistani, is that sense of distinction is also there in Bengal, the West Bengal, the Indian Bengal, because Bengalis always had this sense of nationalism, and then obviously there are certain tribes and hill tribes and things like that who don't share the culture of India, and this is obviously, sometimes we hear about that in Mizoram this thing has happened or that thing has happened and so on. It is easy to ascribe this to, let's say, the Chinese or Maoist or so on, but basically it just reflects some of the cultural and the other aspects of India. So what I'm trying to basically say that India has got quite a diverse population, and one should appreciate that India has managed to maintain a state of union. And one of the reasons that, unlike Pakistan, India did not have military coups is basically that when India came into being as a separate country after partition, a lot of its army was basically dominated by people from very small areas, the Sikhs and something like that, and there was basically very little chance of a military general being able to get the support of the various political parties and various ethnic groups and so on. And probably one of the reasons that India still does not have a army which has got the last say in anything is because of the great deal of diversity which India has got, and the uneasy state of union, as I would say. Although many would immediately protest that this is just wishful thinking or something like that, but these are realities, and these are the realities because of the geography, the race, the structure, and various other historical influences. Personally, I would say that despite the effort, despite the desire of both India and Pakistan that the other one should somehow become a confederation or disintegrate altogether, is really basically a recipe for disaster on both sides of the border. Because India, whenever India is split, the subcontinent has split into component parts, it has gone on splitting. There was very little to stop it, and very few conquerors, they managed to unify India effectively. The British were one of them, the earlier Turkish were one of them, and the Mughals were one of them, and there were some Indians also. But generally speaking, that has required the help of some outsider rather than an insider. And then, of course, there is always a danger in during disintegration of country like India that the central control will become weak and the Muslims and other minorities will become victim in many states and so on. These are dangers which are real. They are not just imaginary dangers. And similarly, one of the reasons that Pakistan has been able to stand up to India despite its small size, less resources, population, is because Pakistan is basically has got an array of martial races. The Jats, great martial race, the Rajputs, the most famous of them all, the Baloch, also good fighters, the Pashtun, the world famous fighters. Even Sindhis were not much behind that, and this type of the racial lot of Pakistan was always a martial lot, and obviously a martial law does not accept any browbeating or defeat or anything like that. So generally speaking, despite the constraint of resources, despite the various things, India has not been able to browbeat. And yesterday, when Abdul Qadir Khan, the so-called father of Pakistan's nuclear bomb, died, obviously there were several groups who were not interested in raising the profile of Qadir Khan. Qadir Khan was always, during his life, regarded as a potential candidate for a presidentship of Pakistan, and obviously it didn't matter whether it was the PML and government of 1998, or it was Mr. Musharraf's government, or it was somebody after Mr. Imran's government, or anybody like that. They always had an awe of him, and they were afraid that the people may not just demand that put him in the steed or something, we agree to him. So he was always, after the making atomic bomb, he was always regarded as a threat to the power circles. What a something. But he was also a very strong man in himself, and he was a humanitarian and so on. And also an intellectual and a writer. With this type of thing, similarly, India's thinking that somehow they can annex Kashmir is absolutely a recipe for war, because the thing is that as Mr. Modi thinks that he can just annex India, annex Kashmir, and control the waters of Punjab and Sindh, and then he'll be in a position to appease the Sikhs that we'll give you some agriculture, some water or something like that. This is basically a recipe for war. Punjab and Sindh will definitely go into nuclear war with India if this type of thing happens. Heavens forbid. Regarding the Kashmiris, Kashmiris have been an unfortunate lot for a long period of time. Although Kashmiris as an ethnic group has played a much more important part in Pakistan than in India. They have been a good evidence of that is the Kashmiri origin Mr. Nawaz Sharif, who has played the most part in politics of Pakistan for about 40 years, along with his brother, and mind it, that nobody in the last 200 to 300 years in the Indo-Pak subcontinent has exerted so much influence over such an area among the Muslims of the subcontinent as these two brothers had. I think he appointed 7 or 8 army chiefs. He was a Kashmiri. And then he was also displaced in a coup in 1999, and some of the people who were doing the coup were again Kashmiris in origin. And then, of course, Kashmiris are quite well embedded in the Pakistan army. And Kashmiris, they are married all around amongst Pakistanis, Punjabis, and so on. So, and one of the problems among Kashmiris is that Kashmiris do not constitute a full nationality in the common term, because they so much resemble culturally the Punjabis, the main part of Kashmir, the Punjabis, that to classify them as a separate race or something just because there are some dialects which are different in some areas is really slightly far-fetched. In fact, the areas of Kashmir which had some distinction, cultural or some ethnic distinction, were the ones which were already became part of Pakistan in the form of Gilgit, Baltistan, and northern areas, and another distinct thing which joined supposedly was the Ladakh area of India, and so on. So what is left of the valley of Kashmir, in my view, is a incomplete nationality, and that is one of the reasons that Gilani Sahib, who died, the foremost Kashmiri leader of the Hurriyat conference and a core person, the most courageous of them all, and who suffered most of it also, was so much pro-Pakistan, because basically, naturally speaking, they are more aligned to the Punjabi Muslims than to other communities. Just as some of the people of the Jammu area, they are more aligned towards the Hindu Sikh community of India. So the matter of the valley of Kashmir and the Jammu is ethnically somewhat and religiously somewhat different. While the most controversial areas, they are already integrated with Pakistan. Some part has been taken by China, and so that also puts a different complexion to the whole issue. Besides, there appears to be an agreement among India and Pakistan, and basically I think this agreement pertains to a underhand sense of understanding without anything in writing or anything like that. There is a sense of understanding just going by the 70 years of foreign policy and internal policies and everything, that there are going to be only two federations in the subcontinent. That was the initial thing. And one was the federation, the Muslim Federation of Pakistan, although Bangladesh rose out of that as a parallel, and the Hindu-Indian Federation of Bharat. And generally that is the main division line of India. One of the interesting things about the popularity of Mr. Gandhi is that one of the difficulties which the high caste Hindus faced in the early 1920s and late 1800s was that there was obviously, although Hindus were there in large numbers in services by that time, but obviously the government was with the British, and British were interested in spreading the Christian faith, and the very important community of the casteless people of India, which constituted probably around 20% of the population of India, could achieve or increase their status by way of joining the brotherhood of either Islam or accept the Christianity. And that was a great dilemma, and I think that Mr. Gandhi provided a way out for them, in the sense that he took up the issue of the Harijans and those types, the lower castes of India. And it is the view of a famous scholar, Dr. Israr Ahmad, that it's not just this. In fact, very early on also, during the Muslim era and during the Mughal era, the the rise of Sikhism and the rise of Nayyar and some other uh, uh, cults in India which resembled Islam also reduced the pressure of conversion to Islam. Uh, and these were some intermediate faiths between Muslims and Hindus, or some other doctrines which were somewhat newer in the sense. But their net result was, whether it was Mr. Gandhi, whether it was the Sikhism, rise of Sikhism, or whether it was Nayyar or whatever, the net effect was retarding the conversion of the Islam in the Indo-Pak subcontinent during the time when the Muslims had an upper hand. Now the question is that what is the relevance of all this talk? The relevance of all this talk is that my feeling is that the federations of India and Pakistan are federations already under great pressure by the ethnicity, by the diverging standards of natural resources in various provinces of the both countries, and various types of centrifugal tendencies, that the too much tension between them and too much wishing of each other's countries break up can result into a genuine breakup, which would first be in the form of confederations of each of the country and the breakup of the country, and then mayhem can follow, and these areas can become under foreign subjugation once again. We have obviously not closed our ports and our seas and our air and everything to the outsiders. So I would say that the resolution of the Kashmir issue is very important in the survival of people of India and Pakistan as states of their choice. And it's not just that Pakistan is sometimes having trouble in Balochistan or in the areas adjoining Afghanistan, or sometimes in certain remote parts. India is far more amenable to division on the north and south basis, on the racial basis of north and south, of the Bengali nationalism. Then there is also the Sami-Chinese and these types of cultures and different type of people and various types of other influences. And then within India, obviously the issue of the lower caste versus the higher caste. And lately a new issue is emerging in India of relatively educated, enlightened people versus the rise of what we might call the rise of I won't compare it with the Taliban or the clergy of Pakistan, but I would say with the a archaic type of historical type of thing being re-eleven, and to put more mystery into all that is that there is an effort for a fusion of the development of the idea of a super Hindu race, Mahabharat, and so on like that. Although it is an acknowledged fact that the Hindus, they did have a large area of maneuverability in Southeast Asia and east coast of Africa and so on, and trade and so on, which is a fact actually. But in front of such strong powers like China next door and Russia also not gone, and Western power for the last 400 years, and also a nuclear type of Pakistan inhabited by all types of militant races, and Afghanistan which doesn't get suppressed, and Iran which is trying to get out and become a power. I don't think that this can help India, this Mahabharata and this effort to break Pakistan. And I think a time has come to really become serious about the population pressures and the difficulties and the hunger and the absent opportunities for the people, and no standard of living, and everybody trying to immigrate outside. I think this deserves some compassion. My feeling is that the Indian leaders also, whether it doesn't matter whether they are so-called extremist Hindu leaders or whoever they are, it is obviously the responsibility of a leader whom people follow, that he should frame the right type of policies, the things which are practical, the things which can really work, rather than just to win an election and just find some Muslim and deal him as if he's a red Indian and start beating them and so on, and getting jealous that why Muslims in India who were not educated and now they are doing occupational tasks and they are earning a little more and so on, and why they are doing like that, and why the names of some cities are after some Muslim rulers or something like that. You see, they should also realize that Islam is a brotherhood. My own ancestors and ancestors of many majority of Pakistanis, their ancestors were not Arabs, or their ancestors were not Persians or from Central Asia. Majority of them were the Hindus. They are the same lot, and they converted to Islam because they believed in life after death, and they believed in what Muhammad said, and they do it for their own salvation in the hereafter. It's not a part of any political agenda to dominate other races just for the sake of domination or just for the sake of race or anything like that. It's just to make sure that the faith is properly understood, and people who want to enter the faith can enter the faith, and who want to practice it can practice it without problem. So I think this with this, that type of thing is, and interestingly, what I've observed is that in Pakistan, some of the Hindus who remained, didn't go to India, some of them, if you talk with them about various issues of theism and something, over the centuries living with Muslims, they have developed certain terminologies in their talk which is very similar to the Muslim terminologies. Sometimes you get confused that which religion are they talking about. Just like within Pakistan, for example, because of the school system, the Islamiyat system, which is a combination of Sufism, the Shiism and Sunnism and so on, and history and so on, and Quran, sometimes a person would show himself, he would wear black clothes and show himself as Shia, but if you interview him, his belief systems are not much different from the others. So these types of things do matter, and a situation can come that even we are seeing that sometimes there is difficulty even for the proponents of divisions and proponents of hatred to really practice it very well. In fact, we have Mr. Modi, he is embracing every, except Pakistan, he embraces every Muslim leader, he goes there very enthusiastically, and these days he also has a very nice beard and looks like more like angelic avatar or something like that, or maybe he wants to become so. But the thing is that these things do deserve some consideration. With this, I end this long discourse, which is obviously very disjointed because it's just a very free talk, but it does express one fear and that is the fear of miscalculation resulting in a nuclear war in the subcontinent unnecessarily. Thank you very much.